February 2, 1945, Clark Air Base, Luzon, Philippines. The scorching sun beat relentlessly on the runway, the thermometer climbing past 35 degrees Celsius. Major Frank T. McCoy squinted through the glare as he walked toward a Japanese aircraft that would shatter everything he believed about enemy aviation. McCoy was far from inexperienced. At 34, he had spent years piecing together the wreckage of enemy planes across the Pacific, from the coral reefs of the Solomons to the dense jungles of New Guinea. He had crawled through the charred skeletons of Zeros, dissected Nakajima bombers, and cataloged engines and fuselage fragments from countless crashes. Yet nothing in his meticulous work had prepared him for what he would find today. Tail number 763-12 rested silently on the tarmac, a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, astonishingly intact. It was not a battle-scarred husk, it was a fully operational aircraft, apparently abandoned in the chaos of retreat. Its long, cigar-shaped fuselage stretched nearly 20 meters, and the 25-meter wingspan cast a daunting shadow over the concrete. McCoy climbed onto the wing with measured steps, fingers tracing the inspection panel latches. They yielded without resistance. No locks, no complex mechanisms. Inside, the reality froze him in place. The fuel tanks were fully exposed. No self-sealing lining, no armor, no fire suppression system, only a thin 2-millimeter layer of aluminum, barely thicker than a soda can, shielding thousands of liters of aviation fuel. Panel after panel revealed the same alarming absence of protection. This was not the result of damage or a field fix. This was deliberate, original engineering. The flying cigar suddenly made grim sense, and so did the catastrophic loss rates Japanese bomber crews had endured since 1942. McCoy understood the calculus behind it, a war strategy that prized extended operational range above the lives of the men aboard. Here, in stark metal and fuel, was the evidence of a doctrine that treated human survival as secondary to mission reach. The story of the Betty's deadly compromise began in Tokyo, 1937. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics issued specifications that seemed almost fantastical. A land-based attack bomber capable of carrying 800 kilograms of bombs over a combat radius of 2,400 kilometers, reaching speeds up to 400 kilometers per hour, and manned by a crew of 7. No aircraft anywhere in the world could meet such requirements. American bombers, like the B-17, emphasized defensive armament and crew protection. British bombers prioritized payload. The Japanese Navy, however, demanded something entirely different: the ability to strike targets across the vast expanse of the Pacific, unhindered by distance. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries received the contract. The lead designer, Jiro Honjo, confronted an unavoidable reality: weight. To meet the extreme range requirement, the aircraft would need to carry nearly its empty weight in fuel. Every kilogram counted. Honjo's calculations were unforgiving. To satisfy the Navy's demands, the bomber required roughly 4,780 liters of aviation fuel, weighing over 3,400 kilograms. Some sacrifice was inevitable. Western forces had already decided. Self-sealing fuel tanks were mandatory. Layers of rubber compounds would expand when punctured, sealing holes and preventing catastrophic leaks. The system wasn't perfect, but it significantly improved the survival rate of crews under fire. In Japan, however, the addition of such protection posed a dilemma. A full self-sealing fuel system would add over 500 kilograms, forcing a reduction in fuel load by nearly 800 liters, which in turn would cut the operational radius by nearly 1,000 kilometers. Honjo made the choice that would define the aircraft's lethal reputation: eliminate protection entirely. Every gram of weight would be devoted to fuel and engines. Crew survival was secondary. Operational reach was paramount. The first prototype took to the skies in October 1939. Test flights revealed astonishing performance. Unloaded, the aircraft achieved more than 6,000 kilometers of range, easily surpassing the Navy specifications. Speeds topped 428 kilometers per hour. Japanese naval leadership was ecstatic. Production commenced immediately. By April 1941, operational units began receiving G4M bombers. The aircraft's capabilities were revolutionary. Japanese air power could now strike anywhere in the Pacific with near impunity. Yet seasoned pilots and crew immediately recognized the gaping vulnerability. Almost no protection existed for fuel tanks or critical systems. Outwardly, they complied silently with the Navy's specifications, but privately, the danger was evident.
December 8, 1941. Hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, 82 G4M bombers and 26 G3M bombers departed Formosa, targeting Clark Field in the Philippines. The strike was devastating in its efficiency. At 12:35 p.m., from 20,000 feet, the formation unleashed 636 bombs across the American base. Of 17 B-17 flying fortresses on the ground, 12 were destroyed instantly. Nearly every P-40 Warhawk was eliminated. The Bettys returned without a scratch, having struck from 460 miles away, a distance beyond the reach of any American bomber at that time. 2 days later, December 10th, a more dramatic test of capability occurred. 26 G4M bombers launched an attack on British Force Z, including the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and battlecruiser HMS Repulse. The torpedo assault was devastating. Within 2 hours, both capital ships had sunk, with a loss of 841 British lives. For the first time in naval history, heavily defended capital ships had been destroyed solely by aircraft over open sea. Winston Churchill later wrote, "In all the war, I never received a more direct shock." By early 1942, the Betty seemed unstoppable. On February 19th, Japanese aircraft, including 27 G4M bombers, struck Darwin, Australia, operating from bases over 1,500 kilometers away. Between March and July, Bettys from Rabaul carried out near-daily raids over Port Moresby, flying across dense jungle and mountainous terrain. The aircraft's extraordinary range created tactical asymmetry. Allied forces could strike only rarely, often beyond fighter escort range. Yet this advantage relied on minimal opposition. As American fighter strength grew and pilot skill improved, the vulnerability would soon become catastrophic. August 8, 1942. 23 G4M bombers departed Rabaul for Guadalcanal. The mission appeared routine, but American intelligence had forewarning. Marine F-4F Wildcat fighters from Henderson Field intercepted the formation over Savo Island. What followed was slaughter. Captain Marion Carl, leading the American fighters, recounted, "We approached from high and ahead. The moment our rounds struck their wings, they exploded. One burst, maybe 2 seconds of fire, and the whole aircraft became a fireball. Of 23 bombers, 18 were destroyed. Approximately 120 Japanese airmen died in a single engagement, the worst loss for the G4M to that point. The 5 survivors escaped only by jettisoning bombs and fleeing at maximum speed. American pilots consistently reported the same horrifying effect. Even a few hits anywhere on the wing could ignite the aircraft instantly. The unprotected fuel tanks made the Betty essentially a flying bomb. Nicknames spread: Flying Cigar and Flying Zippo, referring to its tendency to burst into flames at the slightest provocation. Ensign James Sweat, who shot down 7 Japanese aircraft in a single mission, later recalled, "The Betty was the easiest kill in the Pacific. Hit the wing anywhere and it was over. The whole thing would light up like a torch. After Guadalcanal, the pattern of catastrophic losses continued. Between August and October 1942 alone, more than 100 G4M bombers were destroyed in repeated engagements over the Solomon Islands. Around 700 Japanese airmen perished in just 3 months. The scope of the vulnerability only became fully apparent when American forces captured intact examples at Buna, New Guinea, in November 1942. Technical Sergeant Robert Hayes opened the wing panels and immediately grasped the truth. There was nothing. No self-sealing tanks, no protective armor, nothing to shield the high-octane fuel from enemy fire. The contrast with American bombers like the B-17 and B-24 was stark. Those aircraft carried protective systems adding hundreds of kilograms to preserve crew lives. The Betty had none. The design choice that had maximized range now ensured near-certain death when under attack. Japanese pilots themselves understood the danger. Lieutenant Fuja Yo of the Takao Air Group wrote to his family in October 1942, "We call our aircraft the Hamaki, the cigar. Each mission we joke about who will light up today, but it is not really a joke. Yesterday, Tanaka's plane took a single hit during the bombing run. We watched it fall. The fire was visible from 2 kilometers away. 7 men. I knew each one." Unlike their American counterparts, who trusted that their bombers would survive some damage, Japanese crews realized survival depended entirely on evasion. No wounded Bettys returned. They either came back intact or not at all.
Petty Officer Kawasaki Hiroshi, a gunner, maintained a diary recovered after the war. Third mission to Guadalcanal. 14 aircraft departed, 9 returned. Americans are everywhere now. We are not flying bombers, we are flying coffins with wings. Some crews attempted rudimentary solutions. Rubber matting was installed beneath the fuel tanks, flak vests hung near wing roots, small gestures in hopes of protection. But these measures were almost entirely ineffective. The fundamental flaw remained unaddressed. Reports from senior Japanese commanders reflected growing concern. Lieutenant Commander Takahashi Kawichi, a decorated officer, wrote in late 1942, "The G4M is operationally obsolete. We cannot sustain these loss rates. Every mission ends in death. Protected aircraft are required, or we must cease flying." His assessment was ignored. Japan's industrial capacity was already overstretched. A redesign would take years, and crews would have to accept the risk. By mid-1943, survival rates for crews flying the Rabaul-Guadalcanal route dropped below 30% for completing 30 missions. Most crews never finished their tours, dying in flames over the Solomon Sea. Warrant Officer Saito Masao, one of the few to survive the entire Guadalcanal campaign, reflected decades later. Everyone knew. We were dying because someone decided our lives were worth less than a few hundred kilograms of weight savings. That was the cost of range. Blood. 2 events would cement Betty's reputation as a lethal design. On April 18, 1943, Admiral Isaroku Yamamoto, mastermind of Pearl Harbor, was flying from Rabaul to Bougainville in a G4M. American P-38 Lightnings intercepted the aircraft. First Lieutenant Rex Barber described the attack. "We came in from below and behind. I fired a long burst into the wing root and engine. The bomber immediately caught fire. Instantly. There was zero chance of survival." Even Japan's most important commander could not escape the vulnerability embedded in the aircraft's design. A more gruesome example occurred on March 21, 1945. 18 G4M bombers carried the experimental Oker manned rocket bombs against American ships near Okinawa. The payloads, heavy and aerodynamically unstable, crippled the aircraft's already marginal performance. American radar tracked the formation 60 miles out.
Hellcat fighters intercepted the bombers well before the release point. The entire formation was systematically destroyed. Not one Betty survived. A total of 137 bomber crew and 15 Oker pilots perished. The mission failed entirely. This engagement demonstrated conclusively that even in one-way or extreme attack scenarios, the aircraft could not survive long enough to complete its mission. Major McCoy's inspection at Clark Air Base provided the final technical confirmation. Eliminating protection systems saved over 500 kilograms, directly translating into extended range. Yet it created a fatal vulnerability. Any strike on the wing or fuel tanks meant near-certain destruction. Comparative data highlighted the cost. The B-17 weighed more than twice as much as the G4M, largely due to protection for crew and fuel. B-17 loss rates in Europe averaged roughly 3% per mission. By contrast, G4M losses in contested Pacific skies exceeded 15% per sortie. By 1943, Japan faced a critical shortage of trained aircrew. Replacement pilots received truncated training, sometimes 6 months instead of the standard 18. Inexperienced crews flying aircraft with no margin for error died even faster. The Betty was no longer just a bomber. It was a crucible where design philosophy determined life or death in the harshest possible way. The final chapter of the G4M's operational history underscored the deadly consequences of prioritizing range over protection. August 19, 1945 marked a symbolic end. 2 white-painted G4M bombers adorned with green crosses carried the Japanese surrender delegation from Japan to Ishima. The very aircraft that had ignited the Pacific War at Clark Field now transported the delegation, marking its conclusion. The transformation from harbinger of destruction to vessel of defeat captured the full arc of Betty's operational paradox. Production figures highlighted the scale of this gamble. Mitsubishi built approximately 2,414 aircraft. Combat losses were staggering. Roughly half, around 1,200, were destroyed in battle, consumed by the fires the aircraft's design made inevitable. Conservative estimates suggest at least 10,000 Japanese aircrew died flying the G4M. Survival odds for a crew completing 30 combat missions hovered below 30%. By contrast, American B-17 crews in Europe, enduring the formidable German Luftwaffe defenses, faced survival rates closer to 60%. The contrast illustrated the stark human cost embedded in design philosophy.
Major McCoy's meticulous examination of tail number 763-12 at Clark Air Base confirmed the ultimate truth. Japanese designers had fulfilled the Navy's 1937 specifications with remarkable technical precision, unrivaled range and speed. Yet this triumph came at a human cost so extreme it reshaped the Pacific Air War. The very advantages that allowed Japanese forces to strike across the Pacific also meant that any contact with enemy fighters could result in immediate catastrophe. The Betty's operational doctrine hinged on surprise and minimal opposition, conditions that became increasingly rare as Allied intelligence, fighter bases, and pilot proficiency grew. The consequences extended beyond statistics. The loss of experienced crews created cascading operational deficiencies. As older pilots were lost, inexperienced replacements flew missions without the benefit of seasoned judgment. Tactics evolved too slowly to compensate for design flaws. In the Solomon Islands and beyond, the G4M's vulnerability became a known factor. Pilots adapted in small ways, evasive maneuvers, flying at extreme altitudes, and distributing fuel loads more cautiously. But these adjustments could only mitigate, not eliminate, the fundamental flaw. Every engagement remained a gamble with survival. Betty's legacy also influenced Allied strategy. Knowledge of the aircraft's vulnerability shaped American fighter deployments, attack patterns, and intelligence priorities. Wildcats and Hellcats were instructed to target wings and fuel tanks whenever possible, maximizing destruction.
Air combat training incorporated lessons learned from encounters with the G4M, emphasizing precision fire and coordinated attacks. In essence, the aircraft's weakness became a strategic lever for Allied forces. The G4M also left an indelible mark on Japanese culture and military memory. Crews who survived the early campaigns carried trauma and recollections of near-constant danger. Letters, diaries, and post-war interviews consistently conveyed the same message. The aircraft was a marvel of engineering, yet a relentless executioner. Lieutenant Fuja Yu's reflections, Petty Officer Kawasaki's diary entries, and Warrant Officer Masao's retrospective accounts converged to a singular truth. Survival was dictated less by skill than by chance. In technical terms, the G4M's design was a study in extremes. Its range, over 6,000 kilometers unloaded, remained unmatched among contemporaries. Speed exceeded 428 kilometers per hour. Operational capability was extraordinary on paper, yet every kilogram saved from armor or protective systems translated into vulnerability. Self-sealing fuel tanks, armor plating, and fire suppression systems were deliberately omitted. The human cost was baked into the aircraft's DNA. Ultimately, the story of the G4M Betty is one of contrasts. It embodied engineering brilliance, operational reach, and tactical audacity, while simultaneously serving as a harbinger of death for its crews. Every mission carried inherent risk, magnified as Allied opposition strengthened. From the skies over the Solomons to the surrender flight of August 1945, the Betty's legacy was clear, an aircraft that achieved what it was designed for at a price that could not be measured in kilograms or meters alone. It was a triumph of specifications and a tragedy of human loss. But the cost was measured in human lives. The absence of protective systems in the G4M was not a flaw, it was a deliberate strategic choice made at the highest echelons of Japanese military planning. A choice that valued operational reach above all else. A choice that accepted catastrophic losses as the unavoidable price for extraordinary range. American forces approached bomber design differently. Aircraft like the B-17 and B-24 were built with crews in mind. Self-sealing fuel tanks, armor plating, and redundant systems added weight and slightly reduced performance, but they saved lives. Damaged aircraft returned to base, crews survived, knowledge accumulated, replacements were trained. The force grew stronger with each engagement. The Japanese approach was strikingly different. Betty met every technical specification perfectly. It could strike targets at ranges no other bomber could dream of. But the men who flew it were expendable. Every mission carried a near certain risk of death. The loss of experienced crews was not incidental, it was baked into the very design of the aircraft. Replacement pilots were rushed, undertrained, and unprepared. Knowledge, skill, and experience perished with every burning aircraft. Major McCoy's detailed examination of tail number 763-12 at Clark Air Base confirmed the same grim conclusion. Japan had produced a marvel of engineering, but one whose operational brilliance was inseparable from human tragedy. The Betty story transcends technology. It reveals the fundamental choices nations make in war. The Americans chose to protect life and build resilience. The Japanese chose to maximize capability at any cost. History judged these decisions with brutal clarity. Over 1,200 Betty bombers were destroyed in combat across the Pacific, each one a coffin for 7 men, sacrificed for extended range and fleeting tactical advantage. The wreckage scattered across the islands and seas serves as a lasting testament to the deadly consequences of valuing capability over life.